Welcome to Tech About Town, brought to you by Communitech and Elevate IP. I'm Alex Kinsella.
And I'm Rosie Del Campo.
So today in the studio, we have a guest who's going to talk about something we're all passionate about, which is innovation. We're going to talk about it in a little bit of a different context. When most people think about innovation, they think about startups or software. But at KidsAbility, innovation is happening inside a nonprofit, reshaping how therapy and rehabilitation services are delivered for kids and families across Waterloo Region and Wellington, which is very important to say. Because I also, side note, I do know where the KidsAbility in Fergus is.
Nice.
We're joined by Brendan Wylie-Toal, the Director of Research and Innovation at KidsAbility, to talk about how his team is rethinking systems, shortening wait times, and showing how innovation can thrive even without a dedicated R&D budget. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive in and talk about you, can you just tell us a little bit about KidsAbility for people who maybe aren't familiar?
Yeah, it's a child treatment center. There's about 24 of those across the province. We're going to be one of the biggest. As you mentioned, we support children in the Guelph, Wellington, and Region Waterloo. Guelph, Wellington Region and Region Waterloo. We've got sites in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Guelph, and Fergus, as you're saying. Support children anywhere from basically birth all the way up to adolescence and some clients into young adulthood. Primary services are speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and then this cluster around behavior supports. And then there's some other programs in there like social work and therapeutic rec. That's sort of the gamut.
And so both Rosie and I have children who have benefited from KidsAbility. When you're out in the community talking to people, like, do you run into that where I find that when I talk to people about it, whether it's a fundraiser for KidsAbility, they're like, oh yeah, I had my son or daughter or my niece or nephew or someone went to KidsAbility. Do you find that happens often?
All the time. Yeah. I mean, it happened last week. I was at an event at the University of Waterloo. I was talking to somebody from the co-op office, and she's like, oh yeah, my daughter went to the school there. And yeah, it happens all the time when we're out and talking to people in the community, for sure. We support around 17,000 children annually. So yeah, year over year, that means we're getting a good segment of the population.
It's amazing to have these resources in our community, Brendan. I do want to say, when you think like nonprofit or an organization like KidsAbility, you don't immediately think innovation. So tell us what's happening now.
Yeah. Okay. This is my favorite question. So in addition to being at KidsAbility, I'm also an adjunct at the University of Waterloo. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about studying how innovation works in general, but in particular, how does it work in the nonprofit and public service sector? There's a very good reason why private companies invest in innovation. Innovation drives performance by allowing you to remain differentiated. And that just does not exist in the public service sector. If you're a hospital, if you're a nonprofit, if you are a pediatric rehab center, you get resources from government to deliver a service. And as you're saying in the intro, Alex, in those government contracts, there's not a dedicated budget line for how do we do things differently. The resources are deliver, deliver, deliver. And so you don't end up getting the investment of time and energy into, well, are we still delivering the services in the way we really should be? How do we do things differently? The world around these organizations is changing all the time. There's new breakthroughs in technology and sciences and models of care. And until innovation in the public service gets resourced, you really don't see change inside institutions like KidsAbility or hospitals or long-term care homes. So what we've been doing with the Rocket Discovery Center is building that capacity. We must, at KidsAbility, start doing things differently. When I first started KidsAbility, I mapped out growth in clients over time, growth in revenue over time, and they're on completely different curves. Demand for service was growing at twice the rate of revenue. So that's essentially a drastic mismatch in supply and demand. And the way we were delivering services 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago was still the model like a couple of years ago, but it doesn't hold anymore because the level of need in the community is just so great, and the resourcing is relatively stable whenever it comes from public sources. So we've been at this now for 3-4 years. We built the Rocket Discovery Center to allow for KidsAbility to have the space and time to look at how we could deliver services differently. And Sometimes that's technology, like all other organizations. We're looking at AI and some other technologies for bringing therapy to home, for example. But I do find people, when they think about innovation, conflate it with technology and think it's just that. There's lots of innovation we're engaging in that has little to nothing to do with technology, to be honest. And that's where we're getting really significant outcomes for our families and for our communities. We're seeing wait times come down just because we're starting to tinker and test with alternative models of care, for example. So until we had this capacity at KidsAbility to engage in the how might we do things differently work, you sort of had status quo persisting for year after year after year. And that's really common in the public service sector.
Right. What I'm hearing is that new technology, yes, it's a big part of this, but so is a new way of thinking, right? And a new way of approaching what you're doing at KidsAbility. How does that translate to what you're actually doing and delivering through Discovery?
Yeah. Yeah, we are very conscious at the Rocket Discovery Center at KidsAbility to avoid innovation theater. Innovation theater is when you are seen to be doing great things. You've got your press releases, you've got lots of buzz about the new things that you're doing, but too often those things don't translate into outcomes. The only reason the Rocket Discovery Center should exist is if it's fulfilling the full promise of changing the model of care, improving the quality of care, improving access to therapy services. We need outcomes for our innovation activities. And so we're really focused on how do we invest in the activities and the projects that produce those improved outcomes for the system. So for example, again, not a technology one, but a simpler set of changes. We looked at what the experience of waiting for therapy felt like. We really didn't think of clients as active with us until they entered therapy. When they were waiting, we didn't really think of them as our clients yet. And yet our wait times at the time were pretty long, upwards of 30 weeks, 40 weeks. That's a very, very long time to be waiting. And so we started to challenge ourselves to rethink our approach to waiting. And can we make it more active and participatory? Can we get families started early and make that waiting period more productive? And we introduced a program called Launch Groups. Launch Groups to the families feels like a play date. So this is for younger children who are not yet in school. And the way Launch Groups works is you invite in 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 families to, again, what feels like a play date. And the children are interacting, they're playing, the families are talking and communicating and forming some social connections. And then what was different for us with this launch group is that we had treating clinicians in the room also. And they were observing, they were making determination of need. And what was happening before these early intervention launch groups was that we were using rubrics to determine eligibility for programs and need. And that was leading to a false positive rate for some of our programs of upwards of 10%. So once we had the treating clinicians making that determination, we saw our referral rate come down to the true actual level of need. And then as important, because the treating clinicians, the occupational therapists, the speech therapists were in the room making those observations and making those determinations, they were able to triage at a much higher level than we were triaging before. And concurrent with this construction and introduction of what we call launch groups, this early intervention service for families, we were also trying to change the model of care for the services that some families would go into. For most of pediatric rehab, the model of care was 1-to-1, one clinician, one child. And yet there's lots of evidence that you can assess in play-based settings in the same way that you have play-based learning in kindergarten, for example. And then there's also play-based or group-based therapy models that some clients are appropriate for and can go into. And so because we had the early intervention stuff with the ability to triage and determine need, that really unlocked and enabled the group assessment to work well, which then unlocked and enabled the group therapy to work well. And what's happened since we put all those things in place, that constellation of activity, is that we have gone from all-time high wait times in 22 and 23. Those have fallen by 40 to 50%. And as important, the number of children waiting for service has fallen by 70%. So again, we really are focused on, are we seeing changes in the system? Are we seeing improvements in wait times and quality of care? And those are the types of innovations that we're really focused on and implementing.
I was gonna say, like with the wait times, especially, like the sooner a child gets into the appropriate treatment, the longer term benefit, correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Delaying intervention matters. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about young people with developing brains and bodies and minds. And those cognitive pathways get more and more entrenched and locked in the older they get, which is why early intervention matters. And yeah, so if you were to ask a family of a few years ago, when did you start treatment? They would have had intake and a long period of waiting. Now with this launch group, they feel like they start therapy within 10 to 14 days. And they can get started with some universal resources and general supports. And then they're into therapy within, 12, 14 weeks. So a drastic improvement.
Has there been a moment along this journey? Like, those are terrific outcomes, by the way. Has there been a moment where you thought, you know what, this is why I do this work?
It is incredibly fulfilling work, I will say. I mean, one of the other realities of the public sector is that because so few KidsAbility's or organizations like us can invest in this type of work, change doesn't happen. And yet the science of pediatric rehab continues to change. Technology continues to evolve. You just don't get this translation of that stuff into practice. And because it's been so slow, that rate of translation, there is low-hanging fruit everywhere. There is opportunity to improve the quality of care, the access to care in a bunch of different places inside our health systems. And seeing those wins is absolutely a reason to get up in the morning and go to work. It's really, really energizing. We're now seconding clinicians into research so that they can support the identification of new priorities, research areas of focus. So it's bringing new meaning to our clinicians as well. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff there that's really energizing, really fulfilling.
I was going to say, so you're an adjunct professor at University of Waterloo.
Yep.
Research is a big part of this.
Yeah.
So when you second a clinician into research, what is the kind of the feedback or feedback loop for that of the research coming back into KidsAbility or into other care facilities?
Yeah, this was so we have an innovation strategy, and what you're describing is material to the innovation strategy. So when I started at KidsAbility in 2021, sort of cast around to sort of what their biggest gaps were when it came to bringing innovation to life. And there were a couple important things we needed to start working on. Institutions are built to provide repeatable, predictable goods. That's a little bit antagonistic to innovation, which is change and improvement and doing things differently. So one of the things we prioritized was, how do we create a culture that understands that change is part of this and important, and how do we have the skill sets and mindsets to do that? So that was one of the things we implemented, was some supports for shifting and shaping mindsets of our clinicians and managers, pulling research clinicians into the research team as part of that. One of the bigger gaps was around diversity of knowledge. We have incredible bench strength in pediatric rehab sciences. We have some of the best occupational therapists, speech therapists, like whatever discipline you want to look at, incredibly deep expertise, but very, very narrow. Like, we do not have a lot of breadth of skill and perspective. And it's well established in the innovation literature that the breadth and depth of the knowledge pool you have access to determines your innovation potential. And so whenever you're deep but narrow in a particular discipline, it just means that there's a lot of stuff you could be doing that you just have no sense of yet. Partnerships are a key feature of our innovation strategy. We provide services in one of the richest knowledge corridors in the world. You've got the University of Waterloo, you've got McMaster, you've got Western, you've got Conestoga College, you've got the University of Toronto, all of these institutions where we are discovering new things every single month, every single year, but they do not translate into practice. My favorite example of this is a model of care in our schools, because some of our clients receive occupational support or speech support in our schools, not in our centers. And there's this new model of care that came out of McMaster called Partnering for Change, which is essentially the idea that the needs of students from an OT's perspective are too many relative to the number of staff we have. So how do we meet that challenge? Well, why don't we teach and train the teachers to have some capacity to support the need of the student? Really effective model of care. It was developed in the 90s. It was proven to be efficacious in the 90s. We started practicing it in the region of Waterloo. We were one of the first in the province in 2021. The rate of translation of these things, even though they're not particularly complicated ideas, is so slow until you resource partnerships and resource the ability to do something with the ideas. And one of the things from our design that we're very intentional about, as I said, is partnerships. But I kind of think of the Rocket Discovery Center as straddling the boundaries of KidsAbility. Like KidsAbility is an organization. It's got an organizational boundary. The Discovery Center is half in and half out. So when we're half out, what I mean is we partner with our university and colleges. We have adjunct scientists. We have graduate students. We have research grants to support investigations of things we should be doing differently. But we're also very intentionally internal to the organization. I'm a member of the senior leadership team. I have access to decision makers on the client services side. They are partners in all of these research projects. And that just allows us to invest in projects that are designed for fit right from the start. And we can take some of the risk out of it that we start setting in motion investigations that maybe never get to practice at the end of the day. And so that's been a very, very important feature of our innovation strategies, that partnership piece.
Partnerships are so important for us as well in this, in Waterloo Region's tech community as Communitech. So for you with KidsAbility, you did touch on the importance of those partnerships and being kind of half in and half out. What role do you think this community has played in your journey and in KidsAbility's journey to get where you want to go with respect to innovation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I've grown up in this region. I'm not from Kitchener-Waterloo, but my professional development happened all in this region. I used to spend a lot of time at Communitech. I used to be a full-time staff member at the University of Waterloo, supporting social enterprise development and startup development. That had us working very closely with the startup ecosystem in the region of Waterloo, which is, as you guys know, one of the best in the world. It has shaped my sense of how to bring nascent, early, untested ideas through the pipeline to fruition. Like, it's a complicated journey. There's milestones along the way. There's stages, there's gates you should put in place. And all of that startup management practice is how we manage our research. It's how we adjudicate whether something's ready to move on to the next stage, whether it's ready to move into implementation development. So being a student of the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem here has absolutely led to us bringing some of this stuff to life at KidsAbility. And then there's just phenomenal collaborators. Like, I remember when I was at the University of Waterloo full-time, people talked about how important it is in this region that it's got some Mennonite roots and the barn building history. Like, people just come together and there's a real strong collaboration vibe that people don't get in other ecosystems like San Francisco or, other places in the world. So that collaboration ethic is just a part of the fabric here. And I think that it's been very, very important for us.
You're kind of going back to that idea of community support, the Mennonite community, the barn building, barn raising. In the Rocket Discovery Center is unique in its funding too. So it's not funded through government funding. It is funded through private donations through KidsAbility Foundation. And full disclosure, I'm on the board of the KidsAbility Foundation. So I should probably said that at the beginning. But anyways, how does that model work? Let me say it a different way. It's a unique model to make that happen. Do you think that's something that can be, like, both Rocket Discovery Center and the funding model are things that can be replicated in other care facilities or care organizations?
Yeah, I mean, the model's not complicated. The model, like, conceptually can be lifted and ported to any other center. It usually comes down to resourcing. Like, are there resources available to provide? You need a certain, it's called a climate for innovation. Like, you need a certain amount of programs and procedures, and you need labor to manage that stuff. You need some knowledge for how that stuff works, and that does require resources. We're not alone in this. We're approaching this as a different way than some of our peers. But just in the child rehab sector, there's a program at Holland Bloor Review called the Bloor Review Research Institute. They're looking much more at the front edge of the pediatric rehab sciences, so not necessarily as focused on the translation of things directly into practice tomorrow, but much more into the future. Both their center and our center are funded by a foundation. The limiting resource for a lot of our peers in this sector is that there are very few of us that have a foundation. So we are very, very fortunate that we have a foundation that can raise funds, and that those funds, you put $1 in, you get $4 out of impact. So we are absolutely maximizing the value of those contributions. And yeah, as long as there's ways to find support for the labor that goes into managing these programs, the model can be lifted and moved to other centers. And like the private sector can learn from it as well. In fact, I've learned plenty from the private sector about how we are managing things at KidsAbility. We are in the first year of a new strategic plan. As part of that, we wanted to sort of think through what the next 5 years of our program, our research program, is going to look like at KidsAbility. Drew a lot of inspiration from Intel. Intel is a phenomenal manager of translation of science into production capacity. We are not chip manufacturers, obviously, but the conceptual way that they structure innovation, deep partnership with the universities, proximity, so embeddedness, like how do we get researchers and shop floor managers working directly together is something that we are now doing. We have our scientists working directly with client services staff so that once an idea is ready to be implemented and to go live, it's been designed for fit from the start because the person who will use it, the key decision maker that will use it, has been informing the design from the very start. So if Intel can do it, it looks like KidsAbility can do it, and so certainly other private companies, public companies could do it also.
What do you think private tech companies could learn from nonprofits like KidsAbility?
Oh man, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, the call to action is maybe not always, but often different. For a private company, the metric and unit of analysis is revenue and growth and performance on that front. That's just not the metric. That's not the unit of analysis for us. It is quality of care, access to care. And there could be some parts of that are appealing and relevant to some private companies. I think we've shown that you can do relatively high quality R&D on a pretty lean budget. Like I think relative to a lot of private companies and their spend on R&D, ours is quite lean. And so you could spend a lot of money on this, or you could prioritize translation of things that already are known to be effective. And actually, again, going back to the example of Intel, this is something I drew inspiration from yet again. I looked at Intel strategies, I looked at IBM strategies. IBM, this was back in the early 2000s, so maybe it's changed now, but their strategy was we're going to invest deeply, heavily in advanced research. We'll be the first to get the IP, and we're going to commercialize it, and we're going to spend mountains of money on that. Intel's approach was, no, I don't think we're going to do that, actually. I think everything we need to be competitive has been discovered. We are going to prioritize commercialization of extant knowledge, stuff that is already known. And it's significantly more cost-effective. So there's these different ways you can approach R&D and investment and innovation, and maybe there's more cost-effective ways that some of these private companies could be approaching it that we're now showing is effective at KidsAbility.
It sounds like you have to have a mindset of it's not necessarily a revenue-generating activity. Shopify way back in the day used to have internal hackathons. And when you think hackathons, you're thinking we're going to code something up and do whatever. A lot of the projects, everyone at Shopify was involved in it. So it could have been like, a new way to check guests into the building, right? What is the process behind this? And a lot of cool tools kind of came out of that. And I remember, God, it's about 10 years ago now, which I've been in tech for too long, but we tried to replicate it at a tech company I worked at. And it kind of, a lot of the projects were, how do we make a process better, not necessarily a product better?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, innovation is a complicated word because it means so many different things to different people. Yeah. But really, it's like, is there new knowledge, new ideas, and is it adding incremental or drastically improved value? And it could be AI that fundamentally changes the workforce, or it could be how do we improve a process that just makes things significantly easier? Like some of these changes are pretty simple. And going back to your question before about, is it a fulfilling job? My favorite things are when simple innovations have high impact. Those are my favorite ones. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be the tagline for this episode. Sorry.
It could be. It could
Keep
be.
it
We also
simple.
need a mascot for innovation at KidsAbility. What do you need? What do you need from your stakeholders, the community, to keep this going and to keep innovating?
Yeah. To this point, we've been really focused on that low-hanging fruit at KidsAbility that's been not as much in that does it have commercial value space. Like we're getting more into technology, I will say. But early on, it was models of care, policies and procedures, and we had really, really good wins from that. We're now moving into some more advanced technology spaces. We want to invest in brain-computer interface research, for example. We have a lot of clients who have significant impairment to communication mobility, and the science around that is changing very, very quickly. The technology that's currently available to them getting increasingly antiquated. We know that therapy progress really only happens at home. People expect it to happen in our centers, but that's where it starts. The plan is made in our center. The work happens at home. And technology is probably going to be an important tool for helping families get children motivated to do their work, for helping the family to execute on getting their kid, to make everybody feel better about the whole experience. I've talked a bit already about how AI is going to be a focus of ours into the future. We need partners in the private space. Like we have good partnerships on the advanced research space with universities, but the place that we've yet to tap into in a meaningful way is like there's startups and brilliant technology companies in this community that we're not yet well collaborating with. I think that's an important opportunity for us. Particularly if some of these ideas that we're looking at do have commercial value and could be something that an entrepreneur is interested in bringing to market. That's just not what KidsAbility does. We can be the clinic. We can be the place where the theoretical value is shown to have practical value, but those next steps and those technology readiness level, the commercialization steps, that's not our work to do. And so one of the things I've been wondering about is, who should we be partnering with on that front? Where would those partnerships come from? And I suspect there'll be some people listening to this that might be interested in that. And anybody wants to reach out and have a coffee, that would be fantastic.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. We got a lot to think about for this one. So hopefully, again, if you're a tech company in the region, you think you might have an idea that maybe can be applicable to the work that the Rocket Discovery Center is working on. If you're interested in supporting the mission, we'll have a link to KidsAbility Foundation. You can find out more information about how to get involved. And if you have any questions about how Communitech can help your tech company start, grow, and succeed, you can always visit communitech.ca or follow along on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X. I'm Alex Kinsella.
I'm Rosie Del Campo.
Thank you again for joining us.
This was fun. Thank you for having me.